No gods or kings, only men. These words welcome us to the underwater city of Rapture, a city where people will not be constrained by others. When we enter the scuba and right after Andrew Ryan's speech, we see Rapture in its fame and glory. We can see beautiful underwater skyscrapers and neon lights that advertise different services and products. This site is certainly one of the most beautiful sites in video games history, but besides that, this site sets up an expectation of the city that will be even more beautiful inside its walls, and will have so much more to offer. The futuristic style of Art Deco also sets up the expectation of futuristic technology that awaits all for the player inside to be found and used, but when we arrive in the city, expectation of possibilities and gorgeous insides are broken, because the city is left in ruin. The water is leaking inside, the pipes are frozen and broken. We can find oil spills and pieces of concrete blocking our way, or even dead bodies of people or splicers that tried to survive in this broken city. Because of that, we are left to wonder what Rapture could be. We can only hear stories of life before the fall of Rapture. The stories are either delivered to us by exposition in radio messages from Atlas Orion, audio logs that can be found all over the Rapture or the environment that we go through. They also tell us what can be around the corner or something about the past. For example, let's use cats. We can find these dead mischievous creatures all over Rapture. The first one we find is beside the Vita chamber in the waiting room in Welcome to Rapture. We are left to ask ourselves some questions such as: how did it get here? Why is it here? These questions can have many answers. Maybe those cats were used to kill rats and other vermin, or they were just pets of people that lived in Rapture. Later, to be more precise in Bioshock 2, we find out that the cats were illegal in Rapture and were smuggled into the city. For another example, let us use a smuggler that is hanging at the beginning of Neptune's bounty. When we see the body, we can also see some crates below him that contain religious items like the Bible or a cross, so we can conclude that this is an enclosed society that is either atheist or has different beliefs than Catholics, and has imposed severe punishment for smugglers. I just wanted to point out that the hanged body also looks like it was crucified, which reflects that it is smuggled. Even without the context of the place that we are in, we can state the same things. But with context we can identify which of our theories are either right or wrong, and with the new information about the world introduced to us later or earlier, we will know which of them are true.
What's wrong, Mary? You look like you just heard some terrible news.
Capital punishment in Rapture. This isn't what I signed up for.
Now hold on there, pretty lady. The only people who face capital punishment in Rapture are smugglers, and that's because they put everything we work for at risk. Imagine if the Soviets found out about our wonderful city, or even the US government. Our secrecy is our shield.
A little capital punishment is a small price to pay to protect all of our freedoms.
Now you're talking, Mary.
This way of conveying the story or information is called environmental storytelling, and it can be found all over the Rapture. Those stories can tell us what happened in a certain location. It can range from a single toilet or expand to the whole level or the whole world. It can expand on the world building or can tell enclosed stories. It can also help players and warn them about the dangers further down the road. Environmental storytelling could not exist without an environment to place those stories in, and the level design of Bioshock delivered just that and even more. The term environmental storytelling was taken from the theme park industry, where you need to entertain the guest on and off the rides, by making little dioramas or whole stages that allowed the guest to look into the world they were traversing. Outside the rides, they were used to entertain the guests while they were waiting in line, or to enforce the theme of the ride. The rides that mostly benefit from this are dark rides, which the guests are traveling through the scenes that are representation of the environment, or they are used to enact the story of the ride. For example, Pirates of the Caribbean. Modern example of a ride and a theme park designed in this way can be Galaxy's Edge, and because of that it is not surprising that this term was defined by Don Carson, who is a designer in a theme entertainment design business. I think this term can also be applied to paintings, especially to those of great battles and those that depict action or moments from stories told. The environment can be the painting itself, and the story is either in context or in the painting. But I digress. Let us get back to the city of Rapture. As we arrive in Rapture, we firstly visit high-class restaurants and shops, all of which have the futuristic Art Deco style of 1930s, which grants all of them the feeling that the future is here, which is especially seen outside of the Rapture. This retro-futuristic theme already makes us feel what people from the past expected from the future. When we walk through those shops and pavilions, we mostly have the feeling of the city being past its prime time, and the feeling that continues through the whole city. And when we go even deeper into the apartments of working class, this feeling will only increase its weight on us. When we see the toll the war has taken on those apartments, where the poorest live and died because of that war. When closer to the surface from time to time, we can see posters of people that died or went missing during the past year. On the lower levels, we will see whole walls and columns plastered with pictures of loved ones. The posters in the upper class districts are mostly advertisements of new tonics or Cohen's new show, while the working class posters often advertise movement of Atlas, the voice of the people, or the help from Fontaine's Helping Hands. This shows us that in the space where everyone could do what they always wanted to do without any constraints, the working class was disregarded even more than anywhere else at the time. In the levels we can see some more reason why the uprising happened. One of the reasons can be seen traveling through the working class apartments in Apollo Square, where we can see poor state of buildings the working class had to live in. The wallpaper has faded to a single color and it's falling off the walls. All of the apartment's furniture is simple and utilitarian in design, and the apartment itself feels empty, like place you want to visit just to sleep and nothing else.
Stuck in Hephaestus, working. Imagine my surprise. I guess I'll have another drink. Here's a toast to Diane McClintock, silliest girl in Rapture. Silly enough to fall in love with Andrew Ryan. Silly enough. What happened? I'm bleeding. Oh God. What's happening?
But we as the player can see even more in the design of the level. We can see places where you can obtain several plasmids like Incinerate, which is located in the internal flame funeral service area in the medical wing. Those plasmids are genetic modifications based upon Adam and are powered by Eve. They are used to allow us to do things like using telekinesis or shooting fire from the tip of our fingers. These powers can be used to access previously closed areas. By melting the wall of ice which blocked our way, we can progress further in the story or find some valuables. The vending machines where we can buy ammo are easy to find and we can probably see them across the room. And even hear their jingles from not so far away. It is characteristic and we will know that we can replenish our ammo there. But if we're paying a lot of attention to the surroundings, we'll notice that the level design can foreshadow the story. For example, the names on the poster for Patrick and Moira sound oddly familiar and are names of Atlas's wife and son. One could conclude that maybe Atlas is not as trustworthy as he appears to be.
It has been brought to my attention that some citizens have discovered ways to hack the vending machines. I should not need to remind each and every citizen of Rapture that free enterprise is the foundation upon which our society has been established. Parasites will be punished.
All of the levels have a distinct feel to them. Medical Pavilion is all about surgeon making people more beautiful, at least from his point of view, but hurting them even more in this way. Arcadia Gardens is the place of a cult in which people drink ambrosia, which is a mixture of Adam, Eve and plasmids. The fourth floor has oniric sensation and is one of the most open levels in the game. The Apollo Square has the feeling of working class uprising against the rich. We always know where we are because all the levels have a different styles and feel to them. And that would not be possible without the world building of Rapture. In the case of Rapture, the world building is done masterfully. Every place that is mentioned above serves its purpose. Places like gardens give air to the residences, Apollo Square and its surrounding give the working class bare minimum and a place to sleep. Fort Frolic, on the other hand, is a place where the upper class goes when they want to have some fun. Medical pavilions, Rapture's medical bay and clinic. All of these places also include a lot of toilets and restrooms, just to enhance the feeling that people lived here and they had their daily problems.
They dress up in leaves and call themselves the Saturnine. Please. They drink human blood and chant, "Harness the flame, harness the mist," and believe they're touched by the ancient gods. An aging bunch of frat boys tilting back goblets of plasmids and calling it ambrosia.
Objectivism itself is a real-life philosophy that was prominent mostly in the 1960s, and it states that happiness and well-being of an individual human being is the most important thing, and what that individual made and earned must belong to them. The philosophy was created by Ayn Rand, who was an American-Russian writer and philosopher. This philosophy was most prominent in her works such as Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. In the game we can find many references and reflections to that philosophy and Ayn Rand herself, and her works. For example, at the beginning of the game, players are contacted by a character named Atlas. The name Andrew Ryan is an anagram of "We are Ayn Rand." Even the name of the company and the villain for the second part of the game is Frank Fontaine. Even the player's introduction to the city is basically a description of the philosophy and the person that was Andrew Ryan.
Dr. Suchong, frankly, I'm shocked by your proposal. If we were to modify the structure of our commercial plasmid line as you propose, to have them make the user vulnerable to mental suggestion through pheromones, would we not be able to effectively control the actions of the citizens of Rapture? Free will is the cornerstone of this city. The thought of sacrificing it is abhorrent. However, we are indeed in a time of war. If Atlas and his bandits have their way, will they not turn us into slaves? And what will become of free will then? Desperate times call for desperate measures.
The game itself can be interpreted as, and often is, a critique of objectivism, because it can show what can happen when an enclosed society takes a single philosophy, which can be capitalistic and focuses on the self of the individual, without any control or authority besides Andrew Ryan himself, who would not enforce anything to stop his people from advancing and developing themselves. For example, let us use the Adam, which is a highly addictive substance that was used to genetically modify and enhance people's bodies. Residents of Rapture that overused this substance became splicers who can kill and take fights they can quite likely to lose, to get another drop of Adam. This all happened because the access to Adam was not limited and use of it was highly encouraged by society. The fact that Andrew Ryan had a monopoly over the substance did not help. We can learn most of this through either observing and interacting with the splicers or the audio logs that can be found all over the city. When we encounter one of our first splicers, we can see her lay a baby to sleep in the baby store, just to find out that the baby was a revolver and our first gun. The scene itself is presented masterfully, introducing itself by light, play and sound, and then when we come closer, giving us nearly the full picture, and even after that we won't see the whole picture of the set until we kill the splicer. So even the characters doing what they normally do can be part of environmental storytelling.
Clinical trial lot 44, Dr. Suchong, client Fontaine Futuristics. Subject age white male, one Roland Wallace. Can you hear me, Mr. Wallace?
Yes, sir, Mr. Suchong, sir.
Very well. Right, I'm introducing lot 44 now. We've codenamed the lot 44 Enrage because of its tendency to... Nurse? Hold him down! Nurse!
There are of course also previously mentioned audio logs that can add context to or expand our knowledge about the location or situation we have found ourselves in. Those can support the principles of Andrew Ryan, where, for example, Dr. Sukchung describes the effects of new plasmid and confirms that few of his test subjects have probably died during the experiment, which is what happens during Andrew Ryan's opening speech.
Where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the...
These audiologues can also portray the fall of first-class surgeon when he decides to make the face of a woman more beautiful and cannot be stopped. All of this is not always necessary, especially if you are writing for a game that is set in the modern times. But if your game has any discrepancies, you will need to explain how they happened. While you would not need to explain how gun works, you will most likely need to explain why are you shooting at robots and why they are here. Of course, not all players need this kind of explanation, but some of them may wonder how the world came to this place. But the locations in Bioshock are used to build certain characters, and these characters can be used to build the level as stated in director's commentary.
Rapture is filled corner to corner with detail and history, and the cast of characters that occupy this world are no less dynamic. Every splicer, every level boss has a story. In many ways, these characters are a reflection of their environment, and their environment a reflection of their character.
By Geoff Keighley. That is true, but not for all of them, especially in Apollo Square or in the Point Prometheus and Proving Grounds. These locations have the distinct themes without the main character like Sander Cohen, because each one of them has a strong theme itself and it doesn't need to be enforced by another character. And also these locations are near the end of the game where the player wants to take revenge on Frank Fontaine, so adding more characters in the story could distract them from their goal. But these locations still have a distinct theme to them. Apollo Square has a theme of revolting working class, while the Point Prometheus and Proving Grounds have themes of making big daddies and testing them in something that looks like a museum and shopping center. But there are locations that utilize its main character like Fort Frolic and Medical Pavilion. In the latter, the main character is Dr. Steinman, who was the first-class surgeon that has become obsessed with perfection. Because of that, in the whole Medical Pavilion the player can see bloody writings on the wall and floor with pictures of his perfect creations, which can show the player who he has become. Most audiologues found here are also focused on him as a person, so the player can see how he has changed over the time by listening to them. And this knowledge is not necessary for the player, but it also is not intrusive and feels natural in the city that has fallen. But before I finish, I want to get back to the concept of dark rides that was mentioned before. With the amount and quality of the world building and environmental storytelling, I can see myself getting on the rides or even walking through an attraction that is solely based upon the Rapture itself. We as the guests could start the tour at the beginning of the fall of Rapture, where we could see the city in its prime time and when the tensions were rising. Guests could later move through to the time of the Civil War, and after that guests could see the events of the first game or something that happened in the silence of the story. Even the main plot twist could still work since the guests are following a certain path or are laying loaded or even on the rails. The "would you kindly" plot twist could still work, and that could still have the same impact on the guest as it has on the players. Even though this is still a digression that shows us how good the world building, level design and environmental storytelling is in these games. In conclusion, environmental storytelling, level design and world building all work together, and one would not work without the other. There would not be environmental storytelling without the levels that these stories take place in, and without the world around them to give them needed context to the encountered event. There wouldn't be no level design without the world this level take place in, and the world building wouldn't be as strong without the environmental storytelling and great level design. Environmental storytelling is done in different ways, either by the characters we meet or just see along the way. The audiologues we find or the place itself and the things that are placed around it. Some of them give the player answers, and some of them give the player questions. They can even give hints of what is to come. Level design helps make these stories memorable and makes the Rapture feel like a city people lived in. Worldbuilding is perfectly enforced by the former two, and makes it so that the player does not think of the outside world and wants to stay in the Rapture to learn its story. All these three things give us the experience of the city that is not like any other. An experience of the demolished city past its prime time and torn apart by civil war. the experience where we are left to wonder what the city could have been.